Hello, today I want to look at integrating elbows with punches. I know this isn't, well, let's not say it's not the best way of learning online. It's a different way of learning from a video or learning from a book, or like in the ancient times, learning from a manual that you find like in the movies. It's a different way of learning. So there's lots of things where if you're learning with someone in person, well, also, even if you're learning with someone in person, like there's good ways and bad ways of doing that, like going to a kind of standard paid class where you go week by week and pay. That's also not necessarily the best way of learning, because a lot of classes are structured around teaching the group rather than the individual. The best way of learning of all really is you have a teacher who really focuses on you individually and you spend a lot of time together, and particularly if it's not about money, it's just about the transmission of the art. So it's like trying to get people to learn as fast as possible. In a way, I think learning like this almost replicates some of that, because it's not about money and it's just about people learning as fast as they possibly can. If you're training with me, one thing I can do is just check what level you're at and tailor it specifically so that we can get you doing the thing that's absolutely right for you to do next. And I don't know that, obviously, when we're teaching like this. But the benefit of, so the curriculum is different and the way that I'm teaching is different. So I would have you doing lots and lots of drills so that I could check what you're doing and I can push you to the next stage when it's totally appropriate. But one benefit of teaching like this is that you can do it at your own pace, and you can really use this idea of the multiplier effect to link things together. You know, this idea of each one being very much structurally like Lego bricks, that you can link things together because they're all based on the same principles. It's not about style, it's not about technique, it's about principles that link everything together at a kind of sub-foundation level. And that makes it very easy to connect. Everything connects together. That's very different, as I said before, from, I suppose, something that's very often seen as a similar concept, but to me is the total opposite of each one, and that's Jeet Kune Do, where you've got so many different, very different stylistic things that have very different movement principles. You can't just bolt all that together, or if you do, you create like a hybrid kind of thing rather than an integrated, structurally integrated system like each one. It's not even a system, is it? Because there's so many different variations, as we talked about before, and I recognise I'm going on a big unnecessary waffle. The idea is, anyway, that you can look at a lot of stuff around integrating techniques. So if you've looked at punches and you've looked at elbows, and there's other punches and there's other elbows we haven't even looked at yet, I recognise that. If you've looked at those, you can start putting them together. They just link together, and you can start linking those together with footwork. You can start linking them together with kicks. Haven't looked at knees yet. There's so many things that we need to look at. That's another difficulty in design. Designing this kind of curriculum. And depending on you, if you've already got like a good grounding in martial arts, you can probably pick up and integrate that stuff very quickly. If it's like learning from scratch, it's going to take a little bit longer, but what you can do is do a lot of work. And what you need to do, what I need to encourage you to do, is start integrating all that stuff yourself and thinking about how these things link together. That's how you embody the knowledge. That's how you go far and away past people who are just waiting for it to be downloaded into them. You've got to unfold it. So we can learn multiple things together that then integrate and interlink with this idea of the multiplier effect, that you can then link that to multiple different things. So you learn one thing, you learn 50 things. But let's begin with thinking of a few. We need to keep this idea that we've looked at, that there's two very distinct ways of using techniques in each one. One is where we use the somatic bounce, so we use the timing 1, 2, and one is where we use hit and flow, where we go 1, 2, we hit and stop, and then, well, they both use hit and stop, that's the truth. Hit and stop, but so 1, 2, imagine we're hitting to the centre line, 1, 2. With a somatic bounce, we use hit and stop just exactly the same. We stop at this point. We always have a lot of stored force in the posture. We maintain this twisted metal kind of the way that we structure the configuration. 1, and we've also talked about the way that we stack the configuration, and that means the specifics of how the configuration is constructed from top to bottom. So for example, if I'm going to punch, I can, our usual way of stacking the configuration is like this, but it's perfectly possible to change the way we stack it and do something like this. But this is quite an old school each one way of moving, like move right out of the way, and you can stack it. You can stack it like this. There's an infinite different amount of ways that you can stack configurations, and we'll start to look at those a little bit later on when we look at variations. And then you'll realise all these basic techniques that we've learned, they're just like 1% of the, or a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of the infinite possibilities of different ways of stacking configurations. And you start to realise what it means to be an intuitive system, that it can't just be about techniques. Again, I'm getting on a waffle. So, using our somatic time, let's say we're just going to do jab and elbow like that. We know all the things that we need to know to do this. So we just using the 1, 2, and what that does, what that somatic timing does, is it allows us to maximise power into each punch. There's degrees and variations because we can get that faster as well if we move our body faster. And one of the things that it's not the speed of the movement, it's the amount of time that we spend on the penetration point. That when we come to the hit point, how long do we spend on that point? And the traditional idea is you hit like you're touching something very hot and you pull back, and I've talked about before that you can get on the bag yourself and just practice this, that actually you need a little bit longer than that. Pull back by all means like you're pulling back from something hot, but to get power in, it needs to be in contact for long enough to transmit the power. And you don't want to be thinking in your mind that you're already pulling back when you throw out a punch. You want to hit with, like I said before, like the method of training that we build in here is, very shortly move on to just like hitting a bag quite light and just checking the structure. But when we do bag work properly, it's always absolutely full contact with the intent of just like absolutely exploding the bag when we hit it. That's the intensity level that we want to train at. And that requires longer penetration point. So that means that when we 1, 2, the longer we commit to getting that, there's a limit, of course. Like you don't want it to be too long, but you don't want it to be too short that there's no power transmitted, and that can be something that's really, really easily checked. Like if you're working with someone and they're hitting the bag, if I'm working with you, I can see like you're pulling back too much, too fast, too soon. You're hitting and pulling back too soon, and you're not getting the power into the punch, and that's really, really easy to correct. And it's astonishing how people are like, oh wow, like didn't realise, some people, the moment they're throwing out the punch, they're already pulling it back in their mind, and they just lose the penetrating power of the strike. And we don't want that. But what we do want is power that's combined in a combination. And remember this idea of is it tea time? Yes, it is tea time. Wang Xingjia uses this idea of the doctrine of the mean all the time. And I've talked about this isn't numerology. There isn't a magic zone where if you can get things in perfect balance, the infinite power of the Tao will enter you and you'll get magic powers and you'll go like that and people will fly away. It's a learning construct that Wang Xingjia emphasises because it helps us understand the importance of compromise, that we have to compromise, that there's no perfect solution. Remember, the idea of each one is, what's the configurational solution to a problematic? My opponent is there, I want to hit with this part of my elbow, my feet are like this, I've suddenly got to hit, I'm going to go with that. What does my intent do when it's got that problem to solve? I'm going to go with that, this very odd posture. My intent is doing all of this deliberately because this is the way it's balancing everything out. Or a cuddling forward, chicken wing elbow like that. What's the configurational solution to this particular problematic, and how do I do it intuitively? Everything's compromised. That's compromising the power. That's a very odd posture, I know. compromising the power, it's compromising my balance as well because I'm not balanced. Everything is doctrine and mean. Everything's like out of a set of compromises. What's the kind of median point? And don't be giving me the evil eye. There's at least 10 minutes till tea time. Yeah, and this is exactly the same if we want to go 1, 2. There's a whole set of compromises just even in that movement. How do I want to distribute power? Which is an idea we've talked about before a few times. Distribute power. So if I use my somatic timing like that, you can see the movement. I can just do it with the shoulders. I can visualize punch out. It's just coming from the shoulders like that. And then how much penetration time do I want to give penetration point? I know, it's a funny word, I know that. 1, 2, 1, 2, what's the compromise? And the compromise, of course, is with speed, so you want 1, 2, and it's going to need to be fast, because if you hit someone, they're going to move as soon as you hit them, and the elbow is short range, so if they're moving a lot, it's going to be hard to hit with the elbow. So what do you go with? Penetration time or speed? What's the deal? And if you do it on the bag doesn't go anywhere. Pretty much, big heavy bag, boom, boom, so you can get away with like a longer penetration time, boom, boom, bag's going nowhere, straight in with the elbow. You can still miss if you knock it back, so I know that, but a person is different. A person is moving, boom, you hit them, usually they're still moving while you hit them anyway, so boom, now they're over here, and you've got to change to the elbow, or they're moving in, so we can't know for sure, but we can know things like the bag hardly moves if it's a big heavy bag, so that can be a little bit misleading, and we know that on the air we can just do it any way we want, it won't make any difference. The only thing that we can know is that a person is likely to be moving, and then we can use that context, that theoretical context, to inform the way that we're training. This is like a scientific approach to how we think about this. And if we think about it like that, and we think about the nature of the movement, the elbow being quite short range, 1, 2, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult. Things are going to be in and out of range. You're going to have a split second to hit with that elbow. Then I would suggest that we need to compromise on the side of speed rather than penetrating power. I think that makes sense scientifically, so that's the way that we're going to look at it to start with. Then the next thing to remember is an idea that we've looked at before, and that's the rule of thirds, that refers to how far the shoulder comes across. And remember, we said when we throw the jab, the shoulder's kind of pointing that way. When we throw the elbow, it moves a third that way. And if we do something like a clothesline, it kind of moves a third that way. It's 1, 2, 3, depending on 1, 2, 3, the technique that we're throwing. So for this, when we combine punches, and it's something you can check pretty easily, and I'll tell you how in a second. We need to check that we're using the first third and the second third. Remember, the thirds are just the dividing line between the total that the shoulder usually moves, and we don't really need to know what this angle is. I think it's probably about 40 degrees, something like that. A third each, and the way we check that is to think about the centre line. So 1, and then for the elbow, it's got to come to the centre line, and that's our second third, like that. The clothesline is usually a bit further out, so we're going to go 1, 2. But when we hit with the centre line, we don't want to think about the centre line. This is the difficult thing. Think about the centre line and then how you sight it with the elbow. It doesn't need to be the point there, it needs to be about this far. So we want to hit with this part of the elbow, so it's this part that we try and sight to the centre line like that. Then we've got enough going. If you imagine hitting into the front of the face, we don't want it all on the left side of their face, we want it going straight into the front of the face. So the centre line point that we line it up with is there. If you do it directly with the point of the elbow like that, you'll go too far, you'll go past that second third. But if you just pull it back like that, then it'll be exactly in line. So when we do this 1, 2, you can see that the elbow isn't in line directly with the fist is in this line, and the elbow is just across like that. When we do it 1, 2, like that, and that's why it's a little bit off like that. But you can sight it yourself by imagine. It's easy for me because I've got the camera stand that's just exactly positioned for me as the centre line, and I can see like that. But you can use like a corner or something like that, just to think about that and sight it. These tiny little things make a massive difference. So if you're doing it like on a bag or something like that, just have a think about how you're sighting the elbow and how it's going in. I think I may have said or I may not have said that when I did the elbows video and I was talking about the Hard to Hurt channel, that I was critiquing something they said about elbows, and I said I hadn't checked how they talk about elbows, and one of the things they were saying was you can't really do them on bags because elbows come across like that and you always scuff and miss the bag. And in each one we don't. In each one we come straight in, push straight in like that. It's a very different way of doing elbows. And that's not theory. You can go and see me doing elbows on the heavy bag with real power using this technique. And this is how we do it. So get on the bag and try it like this and think about how you're sighting it. You might just be sighting it too far. Point to the centre line of the elbow and just pull it back in like that. So for me it's here. The centre line is there as I sight it down. That's absolutely perfect. And then, as I say, we make a preference. We err towards speed in how we use our somatic time. It doesn't change the somatic bounce at all. The only thing that changes is how long there's a little bit of play that we can leave it in when we do somatic timing. There's a little bit of play with it. We can do it a little bit more for the penetration, and we can do it a little bit more for the speed, and we err as much as we can on the side of speed. So, and that's going to look like, and straight back. Now it's such a vulnerable move, we're just going to go straight back into there. You can do it, no problem, up to the hit and stop point, and we do that sometimes, but as we're getting a little bit more advanced now, we need to start thinking about completing our combination movements by moving back very fast into our basic guard posture and drilling that in. So, and for the routing, we're using quarter routing, so one, and it doesn't go all the way down, and then we go straight into the. So I saw someone talking about pivot routing and why. Well, it was a bit of an odd, it was in each one instruction, it was a bit of an odd video because they were saying don't use pivot routing, and then they immediately started using pivot routing, which I've talked about Swede, we've been doing that before now. This is a different person. And saying like, you know, you want to go like this and then like this, and then he does pivot routing on the second one. So he does use pivot routing like that, like a kind of boxing thing. Well, I'd very much do that the same way, only I'd use fishtail routing to. The claim was that it draws power from the floor, which I've said before just isn't real. It's not a real constant, not a real law of physics that you draw power from the floor, certainly not in each one. Yes, if you do that, if you lift someone up like that, use power from the floor, but we use power from far least. So if we use fishtail routing to get the posture in like that, the power doesn't come from the floor, it comes from the far least. So there's no problem with using quarter routing is what I'm saying. You're not actually losing any power by not having the foot flat on the floor. It's a superstitious idea that power comes from the floor if you do something like that. Yeah, you're pushing up off the floor, there's a little bit more of a line to your heel, but you wouldn't really do it like that in each one anyway, because everything's supposed to be farley, so it shouldn't just be like a boxing punch like that. You should be using this faster twitch with the fishtail routing to do that posture. And that doesn't rely on drawing power from the floor. Like you plug your feet into the earth's chi or something through a chi socket. I don't know what. But we don't lose anything anyway by using quarter routing, particularly for this posture. 1, 2. Particularly look at the way the posture is. This is different anyway if you're leaning forward like that. And we have the rule that we don't use quarter routing when you're leaning forward like that. Not because of the way power is generated, but because it's dangerous. But when you're leaning back, that's not there anyway, so you can get a little bit of push back from the heel, but you can push back. If you use the foot, the ball of the foot, you can use what we call articulated force. Right? So the foot pushing like that can actually add more force than just the knee pushing back like that. Now I've got my knee and my ankle pushing back, so actually you can get more force in there. Then it's about how that force pushing up, you can just push that into the farley to aid the farley around the central axis, which is where the power really comes from. Everything else just feeds into it or sets it, as we've looked at before. So we use the quarter routing. Hey, keep up. This is, I got no time. I've got no time to spend, like, I've got no time to waste, so keep up with the advanced stuff, go back, come back to it, have a look at it again if you're not getting it first time. So 1, 2, and the quarter routing you can see now is timed with the somatic timing. 1, 2, everything is 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. Which is a little bit like, you know, I've criticised where you see some people doing that and saying why that's wrong, and that actually does nothing whatsoever. But this is different. It's a different rule that takes over in terms of how we generate force. We'll tap it a million times. So now that we've got all of that together, the only thing to emphasise for people who are just like moving up into that next level is once again Wang Shenjai's idea that the movement on the left begins on the right. So the importance of this screwing force posture like this, and we're just training all the time not to overdo it too much up like that, and keep it flat like that. Even if we're going to come in, we'll just change it like that, because we don't tend not to expose the inside of the arm like that. So this twice, releasing force with this hand back like that in this kind of active guard, plays a really, really important role in the generation of force. And this is something important that when you see some Western Yiquan instructors talking about this kind of guard, well, you see some people saying like, oh, well, you know, in hands Yiquan you don't do this. That's a whole other story. Not that there is such a thing as hands Yiquan, like stuff that Han Xing Yuan's teaching, Han Xing Chao teaching are very different, even from the most basic postures, as I've talked about before. And then you've got people talking about, why do Yiquan people stick their elbows out? People talking about this being a more constructive guard, like better than just getting hit in the face, which is all true in one sense, but what we're not always hearing is like the real scientific reason. It's all overdetermined. That's also something we're not hearing. People understanding the overdetermined nature of these, that they all do multiple different things, but the ability of this posture to feed into the rotational Fa Li, right? It's just a law of physics. If you've got levers on things, you can move them with more efficiency. And what we're doing is just creating levers and using, you know, screwing force to create extra force that then feeds into. Think about it like as a law of physics, right? All I want to do is turn on my axis as fast as I possibly can that way. How do I do that? So imagine I've got like a piece of wood bolted tied to me with a piece of rope like that, and one person's facing that way, one person's facing that way. Which way is it? One person's facing that way, one person's facing that way, and at the right moment they just go like that, right? And I'll just go like that because the piece of wood is tied to me. They just go like that and push it. Then of course my body just goes like that with the piece of wood. I wouldn't have to do anything. That law of physics is obvious, and this is exactly the same thing. We're just creating that effect, but we're using our arms to do it. Just like our somatic timing is exactly this. Here's the axis, here's the, like I talked about, the extremities, and these are also extremities, and they go even further than the shoulders. And using these extremities like that piece of wood only we haven't got someone doing that on the piece of wood, we've only got ourselves, and we use the screwing force to generate, it's not just doing that, but it's adding more power into the equation that's been created in this, you know. And it's creating force in itself as well that hits into the target as well. It's overdetermined. So have you got all that? Have you got all that? It's straightforward, it's brilliant, it's genius, but it's straightforward. The wushu, the primordial wushu of the ancients is not a joke. It's not a joke. It's not a joke. I know there's a thing where Chinese martial arts has temporarily become a joke because the real thing has been subsumed, but the real thing is back and it's not a joke. So 1, 2, like that. And you've really got to think about your aim here. So you've really got to think about this rule of thirds. If you can't do it intuitively, there's lots of things where I can't remember not being able to do it. So there's some things where the process of learning things has just been lost. It was so long ago. But 1, 2, use this rule of thirds. Think about from the corner of your eye, 1, 2, shoulder pointing that way, 1, 1, and then shoulder pointing that way, 1, 2, 2/3. The third is there, just almost a little bit past the centre line, because that's just in the nature if you do something like a clothesline or something like that. Rule of thirds with the shoulder, and 1, 2, sighting it down to this point of your arm, like a 3/4 across from the wrist. See all of that with the corner of your eye. So, and really, like on the last one, really focus on pulling back with the, like if you hit someone back this way, they're getting sparked out as well, they're getting a broken nose with that elbow going back that way. That's the feeling, that's how strong it is, how integrated it is. But remember, it's not tense. Just in the moment that it hits, it's like 80% tension, 20% relaxation. But in the movement itself, it's 50-50. Once you've got that, then we just think about our most common variations. So I'll do it this way. So 1, 1, quarter rooting again, change, chopping down this way. And exactly the same rule applies. It's exactly the same point that's lined up with the centre line. But our posture can change a little bit, just to lean in a little bit. The way that we stack the posture just leans over a little bit like that to aid the chop down like that. So like that, chopping down that way. And then we just change, do that both ways, and then we change and we do our next variation. 1, 2, chopping up that way. And the way that we stack the posture changes. So think about like, a jab like that, and an uppercut where we lean back a little bit more. You can see that they're stacked slightly differently, the whole overall, even though they're set in virtually identical ways. So it's not, stacking isn't the same thing as setting. It's not the same thing as the lock point. That's a general concept. Stacking is the overall way that the configuration is constructed. So 1, 1, somatic bounce, 1, quarter rooting exactly the same, and we hit up with the elbow like that. And remember, we don't usually have our fingers out like that. Does happen in wushu, of course, like Yong Chun's got lots of open-handed elbows and things like that. Bit of Yong Chun for you. 1, 2, and look, there's quite a big gap between there, so we're still maintaining this kind of rounded guard posture in many ways. Like I said before, there's infinite variations in how we modify the stack. So we might of course go 1, and we might, instead of like this is opening, we can also do closing like this for the. So we might like someone might move like the head might move here, and as they throw a big punch this way, we might change and use closing instead, and the arm comes a lot closer. Those are like they're not techniques, they're just intuitive decisions that the body can make in how it structures the configuration. Or people starting to get that concept. It's like a little musical variation that a musical genius can just like do a variation on a little bit of the melody or something like that. It's not a set melody, it's just a variation that you can just change into. It's a very odd posture, but if you just catch right, it's quite a solid posture actually, so it's quite solid. If you can just catch right, then what are you going to do? If their head's there and the punch is coming in this way, you've got no choice. This is the configuration, this is the right call. Isn't it, love? Yes, it is. You won't always get it right. There's a saying in eagle claw, yes there is, that when an eagle stumbles, it stumbles like an eagle. So even within the paradigm you make mistakes, but you immediately regroup. So 1, 2, like that. So it doesn't come too close like that, so you're not going to punch yourself in the face. And even worse, hold your fingers out like that and do it like you see being taught all the time. I'll go like this. 1 quarter rooting and then up like that. And this is just like a stub, a spike that comes out. This is our Yiquan principle. So, and I'm really using this one to generate as much speed as I possibly can, and I'm using the somatic timing with this as well. And remember, there's a difference when we go 1, 2 like that, when we do 1, 2 like this. I've looked at it before, I'm not going to rehearse it now. And we can just look at a different elbow now as well that's quite useful from here. And this is when we hit like this. And these kind of postures really teach us a lot about what we mean by opening and how important this is. I'll do it this way. 1 like that. Because to get the power is such a counterintuitive way of doing it that it really explains oppositional force in a really obvious way. Elbow comes in like that, and the elbow does a circle like that, and then from here open and hit back like you're pulling something apart like that. And you know, the alternative, like if you're closing, is to do it like that, but you don't get enough this movement to go round whatever it is that's in the way of the target, and also it's generating articulated force. Remember this idea we talked about, one way or another this elbow's just doing that, but we can get more movement before it in that, only it really is with the elbow this time, partly the shoulder. So like that. A little bit of a step, a little bit of compensatory force. Do it with a step, why not do it with a step? So time the posture with the step. Like that. And hit back, see the whole body straightens up into and this is all oppositional force, you're ripping something apart and you're hitting like that. Off the spot's exactly the same. The only difference with when you step in with this, because it's such a big use of oppositional force, well, everything uses oppositional force, I have to say, but it's so localized in the chest. When you do this, you can really feel you can feel the principle as embodied knowledge, which is what we want. When you do the seeking step, as you step in, it changes then into the flat-footed route, like, as you move. Like. It's a lot easier to change from this into a punch than from a punch into this. So let's look at that first. We'll go from that into a cross. So like that. This is quite a difficult one because again, it's a really good learning technique, because the compromise that you have to make is really obvious, because this posture, you really feel the stretch on your, even though it's truncated as far as possible, it's still going to expand the chest and you're still going to feel it as a stretch. It's one of the least truncated movements that we do when we have to hit out like this, using this kind of oppositional force. And for those who haven't, can't keep recapping for people who haven't seen the other videos, but truncated movement is the way that we stop the movement before we reach full stretch. This is almost at full stretch. That's how you generate the power and get it in line. So we can, if you go for the full power, you've really got to let the somatic bounce come back before you go into the punch, and it's very, very difficult to speed this up without dramatically losing power. So it's in the second, well, in both in fact, because you've really got to commit to this posture to get the power in it. It's just in the nature of the posture, it's just such an odd little move. That's why we're doing all of this, because to generate power with that move, I mean, that's going to sting, but if we're talking about knockout power, to generate power in that move, we need to use so much articulated force that we've looked at in the previous video. There's got to be so much going on behind the scenes to bring force to that movement for it to be knockout power, that it's very, very difficult to truncate it It's just got to explode and go like that, and we just do our absolute maximum. And you need chest strength to control the truncation. And then from here, of course, there's quite an odd. There's a lot of structural sympathy with the cross, but again, really good learning point. There's a lot of structural sympathy with the cross in terms of changing it into that, but it requires more sophisticated ability to use your overall movement. So structural sympathy isn't as simple as just being there. You've got to have the skill level to take advantage of it. In this case, it's all in the footwork, like a little change, a little step out and a little kip up onto the pivot root and then into the cross. So I can feel it myself. It's very, very hard. Right, I'm going to do it properly. I'm going to commit to both. That's the only way to do this posture, I think. You've got to fully commit to both, and then I'll show you how much that slows down the speed of the combination. So, see how much that's slowed down? It's proper 1 and then 2. We've lost 1, 2. Way, he's going. Yeah, you won't always land it right. See, when an eagle stumbles like an eagle. One more time. Yeah, it's about as fast as I can get that combination if I'm going to commit to the power of the. Which just shows you like the more, like there's a limit to structural sympathy. So the more I turn like this, the more I can get on the punch. So you can see this has got massive structural sympathy with the posture like that, but it slows it right down. So then the context of the reality of the fight is this too slow? Is it too dangerous to leave you back like this? You know? So then swing round like that. That's why in Nanchuan you'd be like, you'd hit with this one first to hit. To fill that space where there's dead time, turn it into lifetime. See, it's all knitting together as we understand the principles of wushu. So that technique, you're going to really feel that on your, chest and opening when you practice like this. But it's one of the very best techniques for understanding opening. Takes it right to its absolute max. But let's say now I want to do jab and then that posture. So the rule changes slightly now because the really difficult posture that requires the most commitment and the most kind of penetration time or contact time I don't want to think about it in terms of contact time, like how much you're actually in contact, because it's not really about that. You can feel it when you do this posture that if you truncate the movement more to get to the next posture faster, it's about how much power is directed into the target. If you truncate the movement more, you lose more power. And it could just be hitting in at the same amount of time, broadly speaking. But if you commit to the bigger movement and let go of the dog squeaking, the dog squeaking and squeaking, let go of the truncation more to get more power in. More power will go in. So it's more about the feeling of power that goes into the posture than it is specifically about the time itself. There is a time differential, but it's so minute we don't perceive it like that. We perceive it in terms of the power. And you know, it's as simple as like just getting on the back and going like that, and going like that, and going like that. What's the difference in timing? I can't perceive that one's faster than the other. I can't perceive that, but I can perceive that one's more powerful than the other. And when I hit a bag, I can feel it through my whole structure. If I hit properly, I can feel it go through my whole structure and ping into the floor and solidify as the posture sets. I can feel it somatically, so it's more about that. That's more about our kind of Yiquan paradigm of understanding things as embodied knowledge. But in this case, the posture that requires this bigger commitment to power is second. So I can do the jab faster and then change into this kind of elbow. And you see, I just like my intent just moved me forward. Then these aren't conscious decisions. It added compensatory force with a little step. That's simply because this is such a weak movement on its own. And saying weak, obviously, it's gonna really sting if someone just goes, hey, in your jaw, obviously. But in terms of, you know, what my intent wants is to finish a fight in one move. That's what it wants, ideally. I'm not saying that's a reality, I'm saying it's an ideal. So it's just gonna do everything as powerful as it possibly can, if it can. So it'll do things like that, like add a little step in. But I'm going to tell it now, I'm going to give it the problematic that I can't do that. That I'm on two poles, you know, classic kung fu movie fight. But I can speed up the jab and commit to the second one. The way I distribute the force, I can distribute more force to the second. And hopefully that also begins to explain this concept that we've looked at of how we distribute power between a combination, that we can choose which part of the combination is most powerful. Dog squeaking. The next thing then to think about is our structural sympathy with these postures. So if we change, for example, from doing a jab to a flat elbow, lateral elbow, we change instead and we do an uppercut into a... It's got less structural sympathy because this can just fold in like that. So this is, for example, if we want to do it hit and stop like that, this has got just like, couldn't really have any more structural sympathy without being the same posture virtually. But this has got to go from vertical to horizontal like that. So in one sense the structural sympathy is a little bit less, but also in another sense, in the terms of getting articulated force behind the posture, one, so here one, this line in like that is straight. Here we can get this curved and pull it back in and then push it back out, so we can get more articulated force and make that posture more powerful for a similarly small movement. So now we're starting to expand our understanding of structural sympathy, that it can be different. Sometimes what seems like it's got less structural sympathy can also permit more articulated force. Are you having a good squeak? Is that what's going on? Are you amusing yourself squeaking? If I get any older, which I will, I'll be squeaking soon. So yeah, there's less structural sympathy in the conventional way that we've been learning it, but there's more structural sympathy for articulated force, and this is one of the, again, it's one of the ways that each one unfolds in this kind of brilliant. We're only touching the surface of it, but already we can see the depth of this thing, that the way that it all connects together, its overall structural integrity, its structural symmetry is the phrase that we usually use. Its overall structural symmetry is so sophisticated, it's just something else. So we'll go through the uppercut, 1, 2, and we use the somatic timing to bounce. Not just bounce into the next posture, but to bounce into the articulated force. 1, 2, and we look, you can see that I'm using my whole body to 1, 2. Now the quarter rooting itself is taking on a whole different, it's going into a whole different level of just postural brilliance in the way that this system works. So you can see that 1, look, the whole thing is coming back, 1 back and then back round again into articulated force. What I've said before is, like, to the untrained eye, all they see is that the elbow goes from here to here, from here to here. They don't see all of this behind the... They can see you've got a certain way of moving, but they don't see all of this behind. It's too fast to see that articulated power behind the movement. So it makes a tiny movement, like, where's that power come from? Like, because everyone's just thinking it must just be from the arm, but it's from the whole body, which is powerful. So, and now you can also see, by the way, why it's so important to practice things slowly. Why, and not just slowly, but with the correct form of whole body connectivity, the correct feeling of intent in the whole body. Because to get this is not easy, so you need to practice it. Particularly with articulated force, which is like the key driving thing behind how you're going to generate power in each one. to get articulated force in each part of the body moving in phased integration, phased interconnectivity. That's not easy. That's the key thing that we're trying to develop. And just practicing things slowly before you bring them up into faster movements, that's how you do it. I mean, and before that, like just developing the ability to have that higher level of integration by practicing your standing and just getting everything, the intent to start linking everything together. Now you start seeing how the system itself links and works and why it goes from standing, and why you can't trust people who are just in the cult of Zhanzhuang where there's no reason for it. There's got to be a reason. Now we see the reason. So this is going to look like 1, 2, this one, slingshot it back in with articulated force. Well, that's going to be so fast that most people, even if you're looking out for it, you're not even going to see it. The only way you can see it is that the way that the elbow adjusts phased slightly differently. With that, it goes faster than the 1, 2 like that. It goes faster than the elbow moves before the leg goes into the second part of the quarter. Really, that's the only way you can really spot it. See if you can spot that. And try yourself, like try doing it without this arm, and then try bringing this arm in with the full. And see how much more power that adds into that's proper oppositional force, and how much power that adds into the posture. I mean, the idea of oppositional force, again, it's glass theory for most people. They've no idea, and it just suggests an idea of being purely oppositional. In some instances, you can see this is kind of purely oppositional. It's probably the closest we come to being purely oppositional. But in this case, that's like an illusion. This is going that way and this is going that way, but actually I'm going round using the rotational far least, so actually it's all going in the same direction. It's all going round like that. It's all going round in the same direction. It just looks like it's oppositional force. That's probably the most where we spike the elbow out like that. I can do it straight out like that, of course, like that, where we spike out the elbow. That's the most. I might think of something else, but that's the most where it just seems directly oppositional. But even then, you can still feel it in the body that there's rotation. I mean, there's rotation up to that point anyway. That's rotation up to that. Really, it's just when you hit at the hit point, it's just feels like they are going in opposite directions. Whereas if I do that, it still feels like everything's just kind of contributing to that circle. But that's just how you stop it at the hit point or at the lock point. There's always oppositional force within the rotational movement, particularly that kind of posture. Now let's say we change. So instead of going 1, 2, we go 1 and then just straight up with the chopping up uppercut. What's changed here with the articulated force? Anyone? 1, the articulated force has suddenly diminished significantly. 1, because it's just going to go straight up like that. Well, what's changed with the basic structural sympathy? Anyone? It's significantly increased. So 1, 2, it's just straight up like that. Whereas this is 1, 2. So this is a really good example of like structural sympathy with what? We can't introduce this all at the same time because it'll just blow people's minds. You've got to learn it step by step. Structural sympathy with articulated movement is higher. Structural sympathy just with the posture itself, 1, 2, just with the movement of from one point to the next, the structural sympathy is higher just with the technique itself. So we still use it a little bit, but now a different compromise has got to come into play, like which is better here, somatic timing with articulated movement or hit and flow like that, which uses a different kind of somatic timing where we hit and then on the relax we move straight away into the next posture. These are decisions that the intent has got to make, and my intent is making the decision that we use hit and flow. And to be clear, hit and flow is when we stop. There's not going to be any big articulated movement like that. We're just going to go 1, 2. We're going to go 1 from the way the the posture, the configuration is stacked, and then we just change the way it's stacked like that, and we just use that 1, 2 like that to go into the next. Because what we're doing is we're trying to choose what's the best way here, what's the best way of maximising power, what's the best way of maximising force. And it's different in the way the problematic is addressed is different, and what the intent has to do to address the problematic is different depending on the problem. Yeah, Yourself Yiquan particularly talks about there's some things you can predict, like you're going to have to punch someone in the face, and there's some things you can't predict, like there's kinds of martial arts that are going to occur that maybe you haven't even predicted yet, like for example Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you've got to think about new kinds of problematics and how you address those. So some things we can practice for, but most of all we can only really practice so that our intent is able to move between these different principles and make the best possible decision. It's not always going to be right, I know. So 1, 2, hit and flow into the hitting like that. We're also maximising speed now. Like that. Hit and flow into the posture. Very different to like that. It's a different. So the intent is making a different decision about the compromise it's going to make. Hit and articulated force. Hit and flow straight into the. And just trust the configuration and the way that the posture is stacked and set, that it will just transmit enough force right under the jaw. Also, as I've always said, like a lot depends on the target itself. If you can just get one of them right under the jaw, that's going to be sufficient. If for example it was like into your shoulder or something like that, it's probably, it might sting a bit, but it's not really going to do that much damage. See what I'm saying? A lot depends on the target itself, but once it's straight up under the jaw, yeah, that's a cracker. But like into the side of your arm like that, some really tough dude who's used to being booted in his arms or something like that, it's probably going to hurt, but in the heat of the moment, it's not even going to notice, you know. So, I mean, let's say for example you were going to do that into the shoulder, like your intent's got to make a different decision that you really need to emphasise and maximise power into to try and like to hit. You say like the power that would knock a cow sideways 2 paces. Like, you want that kind of power from that kind of posture. So you want to set the posture really strong with a bigger, you know, the configuration is stacked in a different way to really transmit force to the side. Whereas if it's just up to the chin, you could just use a little dink like that. So, okay, these are all compromises that have got to be made by the intent. And then of course we've got 1, 2 into from the hook into the elbow, which is very similar. But because it's a little bit in between, we can make the compromise a little bit in between with articulated force, 1, and a little bit with the hit and flow. So these things aren't, you know, it's not exactly one or the other. There's ratios of the two that the intent can play with when you get your whole body integration is moving onto a higher level. Don't expect people to have that, because it can only come in the end through standing and slow movement and being really serious about that, and then bringing that into realistic practice. It can only come from that. So it takes time. So people only have to practice the basic 1, 2 and not worry about any of this. It's just let's get it taught, let's get it in people's minds. You can revisit it and come back to it. For some people, you will be able to do it. So we're going to hybridize it. 1, 2, 1, 2. There's just going to be what the difference is going to be is in terms of speed. So if I just do it hit and stop like that, but usually when you do hit and stop, there's a compromise in terms of the power. So there's got to be a reason for doing it. So if I can compromise a little bit into getting a little bit more articulated force, which in this case is just a little movement of the shoulder like that, times with a little movement with the leg, which is then all, it's set, it's a revolving set, because it's setting like that with the quarter routing. So the way that we set postures is going onto a more sophisticated level. So we've talked about setting, but this kind of revolving set, 1, 2 like that into the, because it's got to be 1, 2, between two postures. It's got to be like a compound set, which is just a little bit more difficult to pull off. So you can see there's a little 1, 2 with the somatic timing. 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm using the somatic timing. It hits the muscle, relaxes, it bounces, then bounces back, and then the bounce back flows into the little circle like that. So it hits, bounces back. That's your somatic. That's your somatic. Couldn't do it for a minute. Your somatic timing, where the muscle bounces back like that, and on the bounce back, it immediately goes into a circle. I'm going the wrong way. That's because I thought about the muscle going back like that after the bounce. That was enough to trigger my intent to make the movement go back rather than forward. This is how intent really, really works with it. And again, that's a classic example of how when an eagle stumbles, it stumbles like an eagle, because that's like actually genius, but it's not me, but my body. Everybody's body has this genius to do this. So relax. So then instead of that, we're going to go hook, and then that circle is going to bounce into the elbow. So okay, it's too fast. The arm's in the way. It's too fast. People can't see that you're doing it, and they can't see the micro detail of how you're generating force. It's just too fast for the eye to see, but it adds power into the posture. And these are all things that just add up into like people going, how do you get that power from such a small movement? It's like to the eye, you're just moving this much. You're just moving like that, 1, 2. To the untrained eye, they see that and then they see that, both go at the same point. They don't see all of this behind the power behind the move. And that, folks, is articulated force, and the way that articulated force can work in with somatic timing and hit and flow as well in that case. So let's change then. What's different? Let's ask the question then, what's different when we start doing this from the backhand? So most important difference straight away that we've looked at before is in terms of the targeting of the elbow. So one is hitting to the centre line. Then we've said before, when we do the elbow, we don't want to even go to this. The rules change, by the way, for the way that it's sighted with the posture. There's a different rule than the rule of thirds for the front. We'll look at that another time. What we need to know now is 1, 2. Look, what would be my target, my hit point for the elbow actually isn't on line with the centre line, it's across like that, because any further and I'm just too far off balance. And that's a good example again of there's a lot of structural sympathy with that, because I can get more power, but I'm off balance. 1, 2, so it's off at a line like that, it's off at an angle, and that's how we practice this, unless we change into a little step like that, but we do without a step for this. Other than that, everything's pretty much exactly the same for it's quarter rooting, but with the back pivot root like that, 1, 2, everything's the same other than that, using the somatic timing. There's a difference there in terms of it's more effort to pull back into the basic guard position, so in your mind, it's one of the days, like every way of training has its drawbacks. I would say like bag work is great, but don't treat it like sparring. You know, bag work is great, but bags don't hit back. 1, 2. It just feels easier to stop at the hit and stop point like we've been practicing, but now we want to start pulling back into and we do that again using this arm to pull us back, generate, to pull back like that. Just so tempting just to stop there because it's easier than doing that. Now we need to start thinking about pulling back to our guard position more. So and that's going to look like that. And then what if we change it? All the same things are included, other than the 1, 2. Again, it's not going directly to the centre line, we're not going over like that. Stopping a little bit before. And again, the way we stack the posture is different. It's more like an uppercut in that we we lift like that. So this is up, open, close, up and down. One, up into the, so we lift up into the, and the leg also pushes up. 1, 2, we do somatic timing, it bounces back down and then it bounces back up with this springy force. It's springy like that. This is not glass theory. You can physically see the actual concepts in physical use and why they work, and it's really obvious that this is correct, that if you push up like that you generate more force and that it's springy force. Resist the tyranny of the glass theory masters. You can usually spot them because they call themselves master. To bounce up into the... See the posture stacked differently because you've got to lift up into... Posture bounces back with a somatic timing, not all the way back. It's linked to the quarter routine, remember, so 1 links, 1, the quarter routine only comes down a quarter, hence the name, and then pushes back up. This is explosive movement from the pushing into the power is coming from the rotational far lee. I have to keep emphasising, the power is coming from the rotational far lee. It's a compound movement, of course, because there's explosive movement pushing up off the floor. That doesn't mean that power comes from the floor. That's meaningless. This push is just pushing into this posture, just like a machine, just like a lever pushing this round, adding a little bit extra on the zing on the movement round the axis. It's all contributing to the equation. Whole body power, but I saw someone saying like, well, whole body power means the whole body's got to be involved. Well, your whole body's involved anyway, but the way that configurations function and the way that they stack differently, sometimes a part of your body won't be contributing all that much, and another time it will in a different. So, but this is everything. 1, 2 into the posture. And again, you can usually commit more to the second posture anyway. So, particularly with an elbow and these kind of postures, we've talked about before. When you distribute power, traditionally, the power is distributed more to the last punch or technique in a combination. Like you drill through with everything, and then the last one is the knockout. It's a good general rule of thumb, but it's not always right. So, in this case, you can say it's right. Like, go for that. But you can't always make those decisions. You don't always know that you're gonna, you go for the punch and they move and you go for the elbow. You don't always know that you're gonna do that. So sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And then I'll tell you what we'll do over like that, because this is quite an interesting one. Like all the others, they're similar. So you can practice, you can try it yourself. 1, 2, because the somatic timing takes you back a little bit. The bounce like that. And this is like in the old days where you see the somatic timing really emphasised. That's been modernised a lot because it's too slow. Like that starts being dead time on its own. So can't say it's been modernised, but what I just did say it's been modernised, but what's being modernised is our understanding of the need to work more fluidly with combinations. So that tells us, like, don't overemphasize this somatic timing that was in the past. So we go, it's a much smaller, we need a much smaller bounce to get a faster. We don't want to go, it's too slow and it's not necessary. We can sack, again, like I always say, like in the structural movement paradigm, things can be right on their own, but wrong in the context of the reality of the fight. And so we can say scientifically, like, if we can get that faster, that's more right. So get that somatic bounce a little bit smaller. Just a little bit smaller into the boom, boom, like that. And the way the posture is stacked, we're already going over 1, 2, and then it just stacks a little bit lower. This is down, up, down, open, close, down, down, even lower. So we're in 1, 2, we're moving down like that. And this is an interesting one because the way that down functions in terms of generating force is a little bit different from what I said before. Like when Jai calls the energy of the Earth's core, like just gravity, using gravity to pull yourself down. So what it allows you to do is just drop your weight into the posture. And again, this is stored force, but it's a different kind of stored force because it's in opposition to the energy of the Earth's core. I think it's a bit of an abstract way of phrasing it, I think, but could just say gravity. Gravity, we're working with gravity, so we can just drop like that. And what you do is you relax the muscles and then tense again. That's like, you can't really just pull yourself down like that, because it'd be like trying to pull yourself up like that. It doesn't quite work like that. You just relax it's a very peculiar way of releasing force like that, which involves just relaxing the muscle and dropping down. I suppose all Farley does that, doesn't it? But this particularly uses the gravity itself to just drop the whole body weight. And here, of course, you can keep doing that all the way up to a certain point. Like you see wrestlers doing that as well. So that's what we're doing. We're just going to use and because of that posture from here, we can use it exactly the same with hit and flow as well as with the somatic. So again, we can get a kind of hybrid into the movement. So from here, we don't have to bounce back too much into and slow it down like that. We can from this posture just drop the weight into the overhand elbow like that. So that was more somatic timing. You can see it was slower. The combination was slower. If I do it hit and stop, it's faster straight away. And why I'm saying like some postures have a structural sympathy for that kind of hybrid movement between the somatic bounce and the hit and flow. And the reason is like you don't lose as much power. It's all about power generation. A lot of movements where it's hit and stop, you lose power, but you gain speed. But movements like this, there's just some odd movements that are they're like irregular verbs in French. They crop up now and again where you can use hit and stop, but you don't lose power. Then there's a whole other realm of using steps, of using compensatory force that can change all of that again so that you can use hit and stop. But using compensatory force and how that then links into making movements more structurally sympathetic for hit and flow. But for this, I can get a little bit of articulated. There's a little bit of shoulder movement into the elbow. 1, 2, and there's a little bit of. It's such a small movement that it might as well be hit and stop. Like 1, 2, like that, rather than 1, 2, 1. The movement is in there. It's a classic short power movement. 1, the articulated force into the elbow, like that. A couple more times, so. And I can do it, I can go much lower and drop all my weight really low down into the posture like that. And there's ways of doing that, like into like a forward thing. And when you do that, you can feel like the down doesn't contribute power to the posture in the same way, because the energy's going down like that, but you're still using rotational Farley like that, and all you're changing is the way that the posture is stacked so that you can hit a lower target. Whereas if I change it down like that, then you can feel it contribute straight away into the posture like that. Those are our advanced elbow techniques that we've not looked at yet. They're in our hugely expensive. Once we've got you hooked, we've got a series of videos that cost a fortune. No, we haven't. Everything we do is for free to bring to bring it to the people. We are the people anyway, to share with the people the knowledge and promote the art. That's all we care about. 1, 2. We'll look at all those there's other kinds of elbows. There's so much we need to look at, like we can only do it step by step. The important thing, as you can hopefully see from this video, is it's like the conceptual understanding. Once you get a conceptual understanding of it, the techniques are nothing. That's like, everything just fits in then. It's just getting this layer of conceptual understanding of the art. But one thing we haven't looked at is manufacturing sympathy. So we've looked at our understanding of sympathetic movement and extended that idea. But now we can think about, let's say we want to do uppercut with the backhand, and then we want to go for this kind of back elbow like this. 1, 2, call it a spiking elbow, but there's different versions of it. Like you can go 1, 2, you can go this way, you can go that way, hitting with the back of the elbow. So 1, 2. This posture is very powerful like this, and the angle of the posture just makes it a little bit off balance. You might not feel it when you do it like that, but I assure you when you hit the bag, because you're already leading this way like this, when you hit the bag, the way the posture is stacked will push you off balance like that. Even if you hit with a massive amount of force, it's not enough to offset that posture in most cases, that off balancing in most cases. So what we have to do is we have to manufacture sympathy for the posture, and the way we do that is just with a little step. And this is overdetermined because it also creates more space for this movement round, which if you're here, you've got to get round into the posture. If there's something in the way, you've got to get around that. So we go 1 from here, we step out like that, and it's also overdetermined in the set, because the way the posture sets like that also then solidifies the posture, roots it into the floor so that it solidifies the structure. And again, I want people to think about how this isn't power being drawn from the floor. There's a little bit of a push up like that, but it's about the solidity of the overall posture. Like your rooting makes the posture more solid. When it sets into the posture, it makes the overall posture able to transmit the force to the target. That's exactly the same, by the way, when you jump with postures, because that energy is still there, like pushing again. To push yourself up like that off the floor, the energy has got to be still in the body to do that. So it solidifies the posture in the same way, what we call a floating root. So 1, step out like that, and as it times like that, as it hits the floor, the whole thing solidifies based on the consistency of the body, rooted into the floor to really solidify. And you can feel it go through the whole, like when you hit the back, you can feel it go through the whole body. And that's why people think it's really, really odd hitting the bag light to test structure. And it is really, really odd to do that all the time, and you won't develop power if you do that. And as I said before, everything changes when you go up in orders of magnitude of power, but it's fantastic initial training to hit bags really light, because you can still feel everything going on as the forces are in the body, and you can feel them much more clearly than when you hit the bag really, really powerfully. So anyway, for now we're going to do it on the air. 1, 2, and you should do it on the air first. And remember my coach saying, if you don't do it like this, you don't learn the right way. Like if you just go straight on the bag, or you go straight into sparring and stuff like that, your body hasn't got the information it needs to do things like truncate movement and correct posture before. You've got to do that before you get on the bag. Otherwise, it just gets obliterated. And that's why people don't progress in this kind of movement like that. So 1, and instead of quarter rooting, this foot just stays up in the pivot like that, and we just step out like that, just a little step, but it does give a little push into the posture like that, so that when it sets like that, like the 2 roots of a tooth. So, like that. And that's difficult to pull back from as well into a guard posture, so that's also something you see. Well, you saw what I did, that's what you need to do for the most part. So, pulling that back around again. And the more you commit to this, This isn't too bad actually. You can get power into both and get it quite a fast movement. One of the things that the intent will do here is anticipate the big over truncated stretch and tense your shoulders in the posture. So just if you practice this, just feel that like you're tensing your shoulders and losing the somatic timing. It's all just mad things that the intent does when it's the way that the intent functions, that it's being triggered to do things. And if you think about something, like with my shoulder before, if you think about something, it can trigger the movement. Usually what we're trying to develop is like it does that instinctively, like it sees the opportunity and it triggers the movement. But we can do it ourselves, and that's one of the things that we learn and train through visualization, that we can trigger them. We can trigger the intense intuitive response by thinking about things, thinking about the outcome. So if we're thinking about, we want to do that, and we're thinking about this big movement that really stretches the shoulders, and then the shoulders have got to stop this going too far, and that puts a strain on the muscles. So the intent is thinking about that. So even here it starts tensing the muscles up. So when we go here, the posture is too tense to release force. So that's, just have a feel. And if you can feel that, don't worry, because that teaches you that. So really, really important advanced level understanding of how physical movement works with intent. Wait. Come here. Sit. He knows one trick, sit. Well, I haven't transformed him into a performing circus animal, but he knows one trick. He won't even do that. Like that. So, hope that was really, really useful. It takes our understanding onto a different level. So, you might have that conceptual understanding from me explaining it, but as always, if you can't do it, then you don't really understand it yet. You've got to understand it as embodied theory. This is a big problem in Yiquan with all the glass theory that people are talking about, stuff that they don't embody it. They can't actually do that stuff physically, so don't make that mistake. So the intellectual understanding of it, it's like kind of coded words in one of the old wushu manuals, you know. You've got to, it's gamified, you've got to unfold it yourself, you've got to unpack it. But you can see the idea, and you can see that I can do it, and you can see that, that's how it works, and you can work towards it. What you need to do is just start. I don't know what level you're at, as I was saying at the beginning, but just practice the basic things and just be mindful of them, and if necessary, break it down into smaller drills, just working on things, working on all these little things like quarter routing, somatic timing, breaking it down. If you can't do it, break it down to a more simplified level that you can do, and then just keep building up brick by brick like that. Don't miss any bricks out, otherwise you end up with glass theory. That's it. One love, thanks for watching, hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.